The smell of burnt electrical wire still lives somewhere in the back of my mind, mixed with the hollow, ringing silence of men who had just watched their futures vanish. I remember October 1929 as a season in which the sky itself seemed to sag under the weight of panic. I was standing at the corner of Wall Street and Broad, my feet rooted to the pavement, while the world around me dissolved into a chaotic swirl of white ticker tape. It looked like snow, but it felt like ash, soft to the touch, fatal to the future. Most people in that crowd saw numbers, fluctuating percentages, paper losses they still hoped to reverse. I did not see numbers. I saw faces. I saw the face of my mother, whose eyes still carried the shadow of the day my father died when I was 9 years old. I saw her hands, roughened and tired from years of work after she lost our family's savings in the panic of 1907. I saw the faces of my friends and neighbors, people who scrubbed dishes in kitchens, hauled crates in factories, stitched clothes in cramped rooms, who had handed me their life's blood because they believed I was the smart one. Being the sole provider isn't just a role, it's a constant heartbeat of anxiety. It is the weight that settles on your shoulders when you realize that if you slip, everyone you love falls with you. When the crash hit, I didn't just lose 70% of my net worth, I lost the luxury of being wrong. Nearby, a carpenter shouted into the void, his voice cracking, "I put everything in, everything." His son was 9. I had been 9 when my father died. My mother had not screamed. The color had simply drained from her face. That is when I first understood there are 2 kinds of pain: the pain of losing money and the pain of being the one who is not allowed to fail. That night, after the shouting faded and the paper snow stopped falling, I sat alone in my office. No noise, no phones, just the echo of broken voices. The market had revealed itself not as a rational temple, but as a madhouse where men dressed their addictions in the language of strategy. I stared at the ledger in front of me and saw not figures, but faces. I realized that speculation was not a game I was playing against the market. It was a loaded weapon pointed at the people who trusted me. So I made a vow, not to get rich, not to beat the market. I swore I would never again gamble with the safety of my mother and those who depended on me. I would stop trying to be clever and start trying to be safe. I would become a builder of fortresses, not castles in the air. I would construct something that no crash, no panic, no depression could easily breach. And that was the moment the Graham Code was truly born. It wasn't born in comfort or calm. It was whispered in the heart of the storm. After the dust of the crash settled, it became clear that my survival would depend less on how well I understood the market and more on how well I understood myself. In the quiet evenings of 1930, while some men plunged from windows and others drowned their regret in alcohol, I turned to something unfashionable: philosophy. I found Epictetus. I found Marcus Aurelius. While Wall Street idolized price charts and rumors, I was learning how to divide reality itself into 2 categories: what is within my control and what is not. The Stoics called it the dichotomy of control. It is deceptively simple. Some things are up to us. Most things are not. I could not control the Federal Reserve. I could not control elections, wars, interest rates, or rumors. I could not control the sudden panic of crowds, the gossip of brokers, or the next unexpected shock. I could not even control the daily price of a single stock I owned. But there was one thing squarely under my control: my discipline, my process, my margin of safety. Think of a bridge. Your calculations say it must carry 30,000 pounds. You could build it to carry exactly 30,000, or to carry 50,000, or to withstand 100,000, and then only allow 10,000-pound trucks to cross. The first engineer balances on a razor's edge. The slightest miscalculation destroys families. The last engineer overbuilds reality itself. Even if the wind is stronger than expected, or the steel hides invisible flaws, the bridge holds. If your mother lives in the village on the other side, which engineer do you want? I decided that in my financial life, I would always be that last engineer. Margin of safety is the financial expression of that overbuilt bridge. You do not build your life so that everything must go right. You build it so that many things can go wrong, and you still stand. That is why I began to view investments as properties rather than tickets. When you own a home, you do not check its price every hour to see if you're still rich. You understand its value through its foundation, its roof, its walls, its ability to shelter those you love. You judge it by its usefulness and robustness, not the gossip price of the neighborhood that day. So I applied the same logic to businesses. A stock was no longer a glowing number in a brokerage account. It was a slice of a real business. I asked, if this business were dismantled tomorrow, what would its tangible pieces, its cash, inventory, receivables, equipment, land be worth? If I could buy the entire business for a price far below the value of those pieces, then I had constructed a fortress. The crowd might scream that prices were collapsing, but if liquidation value exceeded my cost, my protection was rooted in reality, not in optimism. Resilience is not the absence of fear, it is preparation in spite of fear. While the world expects the best, you prepare for the worst. That is the second secret of the code. True wealth is not found in how much you gain when things go right, but in how little you lose when things go wrong. If you never allow yourself to be destroyed, you are already far ahead of those chasing spectacular wins at the edge of a cliff.
Logic is a fortress, but beyond its walls lies a permanent storm, the psychology of the crowd. The market is not just a list of prices. It is a network of human nervous systems, all firing at once, all vulnerable to the same chemicals: fear, greed, envy, excitement. To survive, I had to become less of a speculator and more of a clinician, studying the pathology of mass behavior. That is how I came to know a peculiar neighbor of mine, Mr. Market. Imagine that every day a man knocks on your door. Some mornings he arrives dressed in silk, his eyes wild with euphoria. He tells you that the business you own together is worth 10 times more than yesterday. He begs to buy your share at this absurdly high price. On other days, The same man returns in rags, soaked in rain, his voice trembling. He insists the same business is nearly worthless and offers to sell you his share for pennies just to escape his misery. His mood swings are not caused by the business itself, but the chemicals in his own brain. Most people are taught to listen to the market, to believe that the crowd is wise. They treat Mr. Market's mood as sacred information. But the crowd is not wise, it is reactive. It is a headless beast, terrifying in motion, nonsensical in thought. Your task is not to obey Mr. Market, but to observe him. You must learn to be indifferent to his moods when they are unhelpful, and opportunistic only when his folly gifts you bargains. In 1929, the trap was already clear: greed, leverage, herding. In your time, 2026, the trap is engineered with precision. You carry a device in your pocket that can bombard you with market prices, social comparison, and curated envy every waking minute. Behind that device, algorithms study how long you hesitate on a car ad, how your heart responds to images of luxury, how often you tap to check your portfolio when prices jump or drop. They are not trying to inform you, they are trying to condition you. Dopamine becomes the real currency. A brand sells you not just a product, but a story about who you must become to be enough. A car becomes a symbol of intelligence, virtue, rebellion, or modernity. An apartment becomes a stage set built for photographs rather than a shelter built for resilience. A speculative stock or token becomes a right of belonging, a badge that says, I am part of this wave, this tribe, this moment. In this environment, the greatest risk is not mispricing, it is self-deception. That is why the inversion is essential. When the crowd's dopamine is high, when everyone is celebrating, flashing gains, boasting about their latest 10x story, that is your cue to retreat into the fortress of logic. You do not argue with them. You do not try to convert them. You simply stop buying and start selling what has become unreasonably valued. When panic arrives, when the same people who were euphoric now whisper about doom and dump assets at any price, that is when you calmly step forward. You treat the crowd's fear as a clearance sale, not a prophecy. Mr. Market is your servant, not your master. If you allow his moods to dictate your feelings, you will ride his roller coaster up and down until you are too exhausted to continue. But if you treat his offers as optional, something you can accept or ignore, you gain a quiet, enormous power. You are no longer forced to act when everyone else is most emotional. You become a cold observer in a burning theater, moving only when the exits are clear and the price is right.
To turn all this into a reliable practice, I needed more than intuition and stoicism. I needed a disciplined investigative method. That is where the Intelligence Investigator is born. The part of you that approaches every investment the way a seasoned auditor approaches a suspicious file. In this role, you are not impressed by slogans, charisma, or promises. You are interested in verifiable facts. In the modern market, people worship growth stories. They buy companies that burn cash year after year, but promise to change the world.
They praise disruption while ignoring the balance sheet. They mistake a sleek app and a visionary speech for a durable business. I chose a different path. I did not want to pay for dreams. I wanted to pay for assets, tangible, countable protection that did not vanish when optimism faded. That is how the concept of net-net investing emerged. At the core of net-net is a simple formula: net current asset value. NCAV equals current assets minus total liabilities. Current assets are the things a company can turn into cash within a relatively short period: cash itself, inventories, receivables. Total liabilities are all the obligations it must eventually pay. Subtract one from the other, and you get a conservative measure of what might be left over if the company were liquidated under pressure. I then demand an additional discount. I am only interested if the market price is significantly below that NCAV, often 2/3 or less. Picture a small, unglamorous business. Its warehouse holds equipment, inventory, and goods that can be sold. It has cash in the bank and customers who owe it money. Suppose its current assets total $175,000. Its liabilities, bank loans, accounts payable, total $90,000. The NCAV is $85,000. If panic drives the stock price down such that the entire company can be bought in the market for $50,000, what am I really doing by buying? I am purchasing access to $85,000 in conservative asset value for $50,000. Even if the business never recovers, that gap is a fortress. This approach is boring to thrill seekers, but it is profoundly satisfying to protectors. It's like buying a used car, not because the salesman says it's special, but because you've checked its repair history, confirmed the value of its parts, and ensured that even in a worst-case scenario, you are not making a ruinous mistake. You don't need the car to be magical. You just need it to be honestly cheap relative to its real, realizable value. The Intelligence Investigator also evaluates institutions. When you choose between banks, for example, most people look at convenience, branding, or a reward program. You, however, must look deeper: capitalization, regulatory protection, risk concentration. You ask, how likely is this institution to survive a genuine crisis? You treat every financial relationship as a due diligence exercise. You are not trying to predict which bank will win in the future. You want to know which one is least likely to collapse under stress while holding your lifeblood. The key insight is this: the investigator does not need to know the future. The investigator needs only to buy assets when they are already cheap relative to present reality, and to walk away when the margin between price and value is too thin. The code is not prophecy, it is prudent arithmetic applied with patience. Everything so far would be mere philosophy if it did not touch your life here and now. So let us speak directly to you, the 2026 provider, the one who wakes up with responsibilities, not just ambitions. You live in a world of endless notifications, curated lifestyles, and financial noise. The culture around you celebrates flexibility, YOLO, and leveraged bets, while quietly turning basic prudence into something that feels outdated and timid. Your task is not to impress this culture. Your task is to build a financial fortress, a structure robust enough to withstand crashes, layoffs, inflations, and the inevitable moments when life strikes without warning. This fortress is not built on extraordinary wins. It is built on systematically avoiding catastrophic losses. Three elements are central: the cash wall, the index anchor, and the personal audit of your spending and debt. The cash wall is non-negotiable. Begin by identifying your survival expenses: housing, food, basic utilities, essential transportation, critical health care. No ego, no luxury, no signaling. Once you know that monthly number, multiply it by 6. That is your minimum target. This money belongs in the safest vehicles available to you: insured accounts or very conservative instruments with minimal risk and high liquidity. You must treat this money as untouchable, not as idle capital. It is your oxygen tank. You do not trade your oxygen for a shot at a thrill. Next comes the index anchor. In many periods, especially when hype pushes individual valuations to extremes, you will struggle to find true bargains that satisfy the code. Instead of forcing opportunities where there are none, you allocate long-term growth capital into broad, low-cost index funds that represent large, diversified slices of productive reality. These are not designed to make you feel like a genius. They are designed to harness the underlying earning power of an entire economy over decades. When there are no obvious safe discounts, the anchor keeps you moving forward without gambling. Then comes the personal audit, the scuttlebutt of debt and lifestyle. Here you apply the same skeptical lens to your own choices that you would apply to a questionable stock. You list your recurring expenses and ask, which of these are true needs, which are modest wants, and which are pure dopamine or ego? Does your car reflect your practical needs or someone else's idea of success? Did you choose your living space based on resilience and affordability, or on status and impression? How many of your subscriptions, upgrades, and little treats are actually draining the very capital that should be reinforcing your fortress? The fortress mentality also shapes how you respond to market cycles. When prices have been rising for years and everyone around you talks about easy profits, you tighten your standards, build the cash wall higher if necessary, and become selective. You assume that behind the euphoria, fragility is building. When a crisis hits and panic spreads, you do not rush in blindly, but you do become more active. Your watch list of solid businesses and sound funds suddenly starts to flash with reasonable prices. You deploy capital methodically, always preserving the cash wall, always preserving your margin of safety. Being aggressively defensive means you are offensive in choosing when and where to take risk, yet constantly anchored in protection. You are not passive. You simply refuse to risk the core in pursuit of the peripheral. You reserve your courage for moments when numbers and reality align, not when your feed screams, now or never.
If you build this fortress and live by this code long enough, something profound begins to shift. The market's noise lowers. Your identity untangles from your net worth. Money transitions from being an obsession to being a tool. And at that stage, the final lesson becomes clear. Wealth was never the end goal. it was always a vessel. In my later years, I lived far from Wall Street, in the quiet of the south of France. My days were not consumed by charts and quotes. I spent them studying Latin and Greek, revisiting the same Stoic texts that guided me in the aftermath of the crash. I read, I walked, I thought. I watched ordinary life unfold around me, families in cafes, children playing, older couples in quiet conversation, and I realized that the true dividend of the fortress was not a number, but a state of mind. Throughout my life, I carried a small reminder in my pocket, memento mori, remember that you will die. For many, that sounds morbid. To me, and to countless thinkers before me, it is the ultimate discipline. When you live with the awareness that your time is finite, anxiety about status begins to lose its power. The urgency to signal success to strangers fades. The fear of missing out on the latest speculative craze becomes almost comical. Why sacrifice your only life on the altar of appearing successful instead of actually being free? Once your financial fortress is solid, once your loved ones are protected from foreseeable storms, your responsibility gradually shifts from accumulation to presence. Your real wealth is no longer defined primarily by the value of apartment 104 or by account balances in any institution. It is defined by how much time you have liberated for meaningful work, for relationships, for rest, for thought. It is defined by how clear your mind is when you sit quietly with no screen and no audience and ask yourself, have I done my duty? That is why the final equation of the code has nothing to do with net worth. True legacy equals freedom of time multiplied by clarity of mind. Freedom of time without clarity leads to distraction and emptiness. Clarity of mind without freedom of time leads to regret and resentment. But when your fortress grants you both time and clarity, you possess something rarer than financial success. You possess a life you are not desperate to escape from. So here you stand, protector of 2026. You carry the weight of being the one who is not allowed to fail. You have seen how easy it is to be swept up by Mr. Market, seduced by dopamine, and pressured by a culture that mistakes noise for wisdom. You have also seen another path, the Graham Code, the vow born in 1929, tempered by philosophy, sharpened by arithmetic, and translated into a fortress for your time. Decipher the code, build the bridge with more strength than the world says you need. Keep your cash wall intact. Anchor yourself when you cannot find true bargains. Audit your impulses as ruthlessly as you audit a balance sheet. Protect your future and the future of those who cannot protect themselves. And then, once the fortress stands, have the courage to actually live, to use the vessel of wealth to buy time, clarity, and peace. I am the intelligent investor. This has been the Graham Code. The pen now is in your hand. Keep your logic sharp and your heart at peace.